He left me standing in a white dress, humiliated before the world, for a woman who whispered poison into his ear. But he forgot one thing: I never stay broken for long. And when I came back, I didn't come to beg, I came to collect. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who thought you'd never rise again, stay till the end. Because this isn't just a story about heartbreak, it's a story about karma with a crown. Hit that subscribe, tap like, and share this with someone who needs to remember. Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles. When I first met him, I thought the universe had finally decided to make up for every heartbreak I'd ever known. He wasn't just charming, he was magnetic, the kind of man whose presence shifted the air when he walked into a room. I still remember that evening at the charity gala, how the chandelier light caught the glint of his watch as he reached out to shake my hand. His voice was low, confident, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, really seen. He didn't look at me the way most men did, like I was a challenge or a secret to hide. No, he looked at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. And I fell for that look completely. From that night on, my life felt like a dream, written by someone who finally wanted me to win. Private dinners overlooking the city, weekend getaways in places I'd only seen on postcards. He sent flowers to my office, wrote notes that said things like, "You deserve more than this world can offer." I believed him. I believed every word, every promise. He made me forget what loneliness felt like. He made me believe love could be gentle again. But behind the glow of our romance, there were cracks I chose not to see. His mother, for one, could barely mask her disdain. She'd smile for the cameras, but when we were alone, her words could cut through steel. "You're a lovely woman," she'd say, her tone dripping with sugar and venom. "But you must understand, our family has expectations." I'd laugh it off, pretending not to feel the sting. Because I thought love could change everything. I thought if I just loved him harder, if I proved my loyalty, they'd see I belonged. Then there was her, his business associate, a woman who always seemed to be wherever he was. She had that polished kind of beauty money buys. A walking perfume ad, with eyes that never looked at me, only through me. The first time I saw them laughing together, my stomach twisted, but he brushed it off. "You're imagining things," he said, holding my face in his hands. "She means nothing." And I wanted to believe him so badly that I convinced myself he was right. I ignored the phone calls that came late at night, the sudden business trips, the shift in his tone when I said, "I love you." I told myself all couples go through phases. I told myself fairy tales don't fall apart in Act 1. But deep down, I knew something was slipping. It's strange how silence can be louder than words. The kind of silence that fills the space between two people who used to be inseparable. Still, I stayed. Because I thought we were just tired. I thought the world was testing us. I didn't realize it was warning me. Every smile, every whisper of forever, every moment of tenderness, it was all part of a perfect lie. And by the time I saw the truth, it was already too late. The dream I thought I was living had been designed to break me. And the worst part? I helped him build it. The night of the gala was supposed to be the beginning of our forever. I spent weeks preparing, picking the perfect gown, the perfect speech, even the perfect smile. I wanted to make him proud. The ballroom glittered with wealth, laughter, and expectation. Reporters crowded near the entrance, photographers flashing their cameras like fireworks. Everyone was waiting for the announcement, the official date of our wedding. I'd imagined that night so many times, our fingers intertwined, his voice steady as he declared to the world that I was the woman he'd chosen. He arrived late, as always. But when the doors opened and he stepped inside, my heart stopped. Not because of his presence, but because of hers. The same woman he swore meant nothing walked beside him, her hand laced with his. They moved as one, like they'd been rehearsing this betrayal for weeks. The music faltered, the whispers started, and for a moment, the entire room spun around me. I stood there frozen, my champagne glass trembling in my hand as my world began to tilt. He didn't even look ashamed. In fact, there was a strange calmness in his expression, like this was the moment he'd been waiting for. When the MC handed him the microphone, I expected an apology, an explanation, anything that would make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. Instead, he looked at me, then at the crowd, and said the words that carved themselves into my chest like fire. I can't do this. I've made a mistake. I was never meant to marry her. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed again, this time capturing my humiliation. Every face turned toward me, some pitying, others hungry for scandal. His mother's satisfied smirk was the last thing I saw before the tears blurred my vision. My knees went weak, but I refused to fall. I stood tall, clinging to what little dignity I had left. He kept talking about how love can be confusing, how sometimes the heart changes its mind. The audacity of it. He was rewriting our story in real time, turning our love into a footnote for his new obsession. The mistress stood by his side, eyes glittering with triumph, wearing the same necklace I'd once worn to his birthday dinner. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. When it was over, I walked out quietly, my heels clicking against the marble like a funeral march. No tears, no scene, just silence. But as I reached the exit, one reporter shouted, "Miss, how does it feel to be replaced?" And that's when something inside me broke. Not in the fragile way a heart shatters, but in the dangerous way a soul awakens. That night, I sat in my car outside the mansion for hours. The dress I had chosen with so much hope was now torn at the hem, stained with spilled champagne and grief. I stared at my reflection in the window, eyes red, makeup ruined, and whispered, "Never again." He thought he'd ended me. What he didn't know was that he'd just rewritten the beginning of my power. Because that night, I stopped being the woman waiting to be loved, and I became the woman the world would one day remember, for how beautifully she rose from ruin. For weeks after the gala, my world moved in slow motion. The news of my humiliation was everywhere. Magazines, gossip blogs, even morning talk shows. The billionaire's jilted fiancé, they called me, as if heartbreak were a spectacle, not a wound. Every headline felt like another knife twisting into my chest. I deleted my social media, stopped answering calls, and locked myself inside my apartment. The silence was unbearable, but it was safer than hearing my name dragged through dirt. There's something about being broken that makes you see the world differently. I used to believe in people, in promises, in love that could survive the storm. But when you've been betrayed in front of the world, belief doesn't come easy. I barely ate. I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights blur through my tears, wondering how he could just move on while I was learning to breathe again. But pain, if you let it, has a strange way of burning away weakness. One morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see a victim anymore. I saw someone who had survived public humiliation and was still standing. My tears had dried into steel. I picked up my notebook, the one where I used to write dreams about our future, and tore out every page. Then I wrote a new one, a plan, not for love, for power. I started small. I took freelance work, studied finance at night, and reached out to mentors I'd met through his business circles, people who had once looked down on me but now respected my resilience. I learned how companies moved, how money flowed, how influence was built and destroyed. And the more I learned, the clearer my path became. Revenge wasn't about shouting or exposing him. It was about building something he couldn't touch. Then, one evening, a contact from his company called me in secret. She told me about the mistress, how she was quietly funneling money through fake vendors, using his name to fund her luxuries. I smiled for the first time in months. Karma, it seemed, had already taken her seat at the table. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, looked out over the city, and whispered, "You wanted me gone, but you just gave me purpose." The fire was back, controlled, precise, and waiting. Because this time, I wouldn't just heal, I would rise, and make them watch every second of it. By the time a year passed, I was no longer the woman who had cried herself to sleep in silk sheets. I had traded tears for strategy, heartbreak for hunger. My pain had become my teacher, and I listened carefully. Every lesson it whispered hardened me, sharpened me. I had stopped chasing love and started chasing legacy. It was during a networking event, one I almost didn't attend, that I met Eleanor Hayes. She was a legend in the business world, the kind of woman whose handshake could make or break a fortune. Rumor had it that she'd built her empire from nothing, defying every man who'd tried to shut her out. When I introduced myself, she smiled knowingly, as if she'd already read my story in the headlines. "So," she said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity, "you're the woman he thought was replaceable." I didn't flinch. "Not anymore," I replied. And that's when her smile widened. Eleanor became my unexpected ally. She saw something in me, something fierce, something ready. She invited me to join her investment firm as a silent partner. It started with small projects, but soon I was sitting in rooms I'd once been kept out of. I listened more than I spoke, studied balance sheets, and learned how the powerful hid their secrets behind numbers. I discovered that the same empire my ex built on arrogance was beginning to crumble from within. His company had liquidity issues, investors were leaving, and the mistress he had chosen over me was draining him dry under the guise of consulting fees. One evening, Eleanor handed me a stack of documents. "His company," she said, "is about to auction off some of its shares to stabilize. Want to play?" My pulse quickened. It wasn't just business, it was poetic justice wrapped in opportunity. We quietly started buying through shell corporations, small amounts at first, just enough to stay invisible. Every purchase was a whisper of vengeance, every transaction a stroke of power. Soon my name, hidden behind corporate veils, was tied to a growing percentage of his empire. Ironically, he had no idea that the woman he once left in tears now controlled the ground beneath his feet. Each time I signed a deal, I felt lighter. I didn't need to confront him. I was becoming the storm he never saw coming. But Eleanor's mentorship wasn't just about business. She taught me patience, the art of timing revenge so perfectly that when it lands, it feels like destiny. Power, she told me one night over wine, isn't loud. It's silent, precise, and devastating. And she was right, because soon, my silent power would roar through boardrooms and headlines alike. I could already see it, the look on his face when he realized the woman he'd discarded had become the architect of his downfall. As I left Eleanor's office that night, the city lights shimmered across the glass towers, like promises waiting to be kept. I tightened my coat, smiled at my reflection, and whispered, "You thought you broke me, but all you did was build my crown." The invitation arrived on thick ivory paper, sealed with gold. His company's annual shareholders meeting. I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers tracing the embossed logo that used to make my heart flutter. That name once represented everything I thought I wanted: power, love, security. Now it was just a symbol of how blind I had been. But this time, I wasn't walking in as a fiancé. I was walking in as the storm he never saw coming. Eleanor had coached me for weeks, preparing every move with surgical precision. "Don't gloat," she warned. "Just show up and let the truth speak." She didn't need to tell me twice. Revenge wasn't about screaming or proving myself. It was about control. And I had that now, in silence, in power, in ownership. The day of the meeting, I dressed carefully, black suit, minimal jewelry, and confidence as my armor. When I entered the glass conference room, heads turned. The same board members who once looked at me with pity now stood frozen in disbelief. My ex sat at the head of the table, wearing the same arrogant smile I once thought was charm. But I noticed the small things: the restless tapping of his pen, the dark circles under his eyes, the desperation behind that practiced grin. He was unraveling, even if he didn't know it yet. He rose to greet the investors, unaware that half the people in the room now represented me. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we're here to discuss the company's future and new leadership strategies." His voice carried the weight of false confidence, And then, just as he began to speak about restructuring, Eleanor entered, with me beside her. The murmur in the room was immediate. He blinked in shock, his smile faltering as his eyes locked on mine. What are you doing here?" he stammered. I smiled softly, the kind of smile that hides years of pain and triumph. "You'll find out soon enough." Eleanor slid a folder across the table. "Effective immediately," she said. "Our firm and our partner now hold the controlling interest in this company." She looked toward me. "Our partner would like to say a few words." The silence that followed could have cut glass. I stood, straightened my jacket, and met his eyes. "Good afternoon. As the new majority shareholder and incoming chairwoman, I'll be leading today's agenda." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. His face drained of color. The mistress, who sat smugly near the door, quietly slipped out as the truth settled in. He tried to argue, his voice rising, calling it manipulation. But Eleanor shut him down with one line. "No manipulation, just mathematics." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The papers spoke for themselves. The fraudulent accounts, the transfers to his mistress's name, the debts he'd tried to hide. Everything laid bare before the same audience that once witnessed my humiliation. As security escorted him out, he turned back, eyes wide, broken. "You planned this," he whispered. I leaned forward, my tone calm, almost kind. "No," I said. "You did." When the doors closed behind him, I felt nothing but peace. Not because I destroyed him, but because I reclaimed myself. The power, the dignity, the control, every piece of me he tried to take, I had rebuilt it. And now, I owned it all. The moment he was escorted out of that boardroom, I realized revenge doesn't always come with fire or fury. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in silence, steady, unshakable, and absolute. The same cameras that once captured my humiliation now turned toward him, chasing his every step, as security led him past reporters and flashing lights. The headlines changed overnight. Billionaire faces corporate scandal. Ex-fiancé exposes financial fraud. It was poetic justice served on the front page. He tried to fight back, of course. Men like him always do. He blamed the mistress, claimed ignorance, even tried to play the victim. But the evidence was undeniable. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized, and the woman he left me for disappeared the moment the money did. I watched the chaos unfold, not with hatred, but with a strange calm. This wasn't vengeance, it was balance. The scales had finally evened. One evening a journalist called, asking for a comment. I simply said, "Some lessons can't be bought. They have to be lived." And I hung up. I didn't need to explain myself to the same world that once laughed at my pain. My actions spoke louder than any headline. Weeks later, I saw him again by accident. It was at a cafe near my new office, a quiet place I often visited after meetings. He looked different, smaller somehow. His expensive suits replaced with something plain. His once confident stride now weighed down by regret. Our eyes met briefly, and for a moment I saw the ghost of the man I once loved. But I didn't feel pity, just closure. He walked over hesitantly, voice low. "I lost everything," he said. "Everything I thought mattered." I nodded, unmoved. "Maybe now you'll understand what it's like to lose something that wasn't yours to break." He tried to apologize, but I stopped him. "You don't need to," I said. "You already did the only thing you were meant to do. Teach me how to rise." I left him there, surrounded by the silence he once gave me. That night, as I looked out over the city lights from my penthouse, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't consumed me. It had freed me. I didn't destroy him out of hate. I simply became everything he believed I could never be. And that was enough. The world moves differently when you've made peace with your past. Every sunrise feels sharper, every breath steadier. I used to wake up with anger in my chest, replaying the betrayal over and over like an unfinished song. But now, I woke up to purpose, to peace. The empire I had built from ashes was thriving. My name, once whispered in pity, was now spoken with respect. Investors sought my opinion. Women reached out, thanking me for showing them what resilience could look like. I had become the story I once needed to hear. It was during one of my foundation's charity events, a night filled with laughter and light, that he reappeared in my life for the last time. From a distance, I saw him lingering near the entrance, watching silently as I spoke to the guests, my new fiancé standing beside me. My fiancé, Caleb, was a man nothing like him, calm, grounded, the CEO of a tech firm built on integrity rather than ego. When Caleb placed his hand gently on my back and whispered, "You ready?" I smiled, not because of the attention, but because I finally felt safe. We stepped onto the stage together as the cameras flashed and the MC announced our engagement. The applause filled the hall, and I caught his face in the crowd, stunned, hollow, and fading. He realized, too late, that the woman he'd discarded for vanity was now standing where power, grace, and love intertwined. Later that night, on the balcony overlooking the city, Caleb slipped a ring onto my finger. It wasn't the biggest diamond I'd ever seen, but it was the most meaningful. "You don't owe the past anything," he said softly. "You already won." His words melted the last piece of ice in my heart. As I looked at the skyline, I whispered to myself, I didn't just survive him, I transcended him. Because that's what true revenge is, not destruction, but evolution. If anyone listening to my story remembers one thing, let it be this: sometimes, losing what you thought you needed is the only way to discover who you were meant to become. I was once the woman left behind. Now I am the woman who never looks back. When I saw her walk into that dining hall wearing my dress, the same one I'd worn the night he promised me forever, I didn't cry. I smiled, because she thought she was stealing my moment, but she had no idea she'd just walked into my power. If you've ever been humiliated, betrayed, or underestimated, this story is for you. Stay with me till the end, because what happened that night didn't just expose a lie. It revealed who truly owned the table. Hit like, subscribe, and share, because power looks different when worn by a woman who's done being silent. They say every perfect marriage has cracks, some too fine for the world to see. From the outside, ours looked like a dream. The mansion on the hill, the cars with our initials on the plates, the charity galas where I stood by his side, smiling for cameras that never looked past the surface. I played the part beautifully, the loyal wife, elegant and composed, always in the background, but never out of place. What they didn't see was how heavy silence can be when it becomes your only language. Every morning, I woke up before him. I'd make his coffee just the way he liked it. Black, no sugar, no warmth. I'd look at the man who once made promises beneath candlelight and realize I didn't recognize him anymore. His eyes didn't search for me like they used to. They searched for approval, for admiration, for something beyond what we had built. He was adored by everyone, investors, politicians, even our staff. And I, his wife, became part of the furniture, polished, silent, replaceable. People often assume loneliness comes from being alone, but I learned that the deepest kind of loneliness is sitting next to someone who makes you feel invisible. I'd try to talk to him about simple things, how the garden was blooming again, how I wanted to start a foundation for girls who'd lost their voices. He'd nod without listening, scroll through his phone, and say, "That's nice, sweetheart," before walking away. And just like that, I'd fold my dreams back into silence. At charity events, he'd introduce me as my beautiful wife, the same way he'd introduce a new watch, something to admire, not to understand. I remember one evening vividly. I wore a gold gown he'd gifted me years ago. The same night he told me, "You're the only one who truly understands me." That night, I caught him across the room, laughing with someone else, a woman I didn't know, with a hand on his arm, and that same look I once had, adoration mixed with belief. My chest tightened, but I smiled. I had perfected the art of smiling through storms. Behind the grand doors of our home, the air felt cold, no matter how high the fireplace burned. We slept in the same house, but lived in different worlds. Sometimes, I'd hear him talking on the phone, late at night, his tone soft and tender. Tones I hadn't heard directed at me in years. When I'd ask who it was, he'd say, business, as if love could be scheduled in spreadsheets. But the cruelest part wasn't the distance, it was the pretending. Pretending I didn't know, pretending I still mattered. Pretending this was what love looked like. I told myself I was staying for the vows, for the image, for the family name printed on the marble gates. But deep down, I was staying for a reason I couldn't yet explain. Because some stories begin the moment you stop believing the lies, and mine was about to begin. It started small, like a faint echo at the edge of my world. A glance that lingered too long, a conversation that stopped when I entered the room. People who once smiled now tilted their heads with that pitiful look, the kind that said they knew something I didn't. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, that my mind was playing tricks because my heart already knew what my lips refused to say out loud. But whispers have a way of becoming louder when you try to ignore them. The first time I heard her name, it slipped from the mouth of a socialite at a luncheon. She leaned across the table, her diamond bracelet clinking softly, and whispered, "Poor thing, she doesn't even know." Then she smiled at me, as if to say, "Bless your heart." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. My silence protected my pride more than the truth ever could. But that night, I stared at my reflection and realized pride was just another kind of prison. Everywhere I went, the world seemed to be testing how much I could endure without breaking. His mother stopped calling me. His business partners would avoid mentioning certain company trips. And when he came home smelling of perfume, that wasn't mine. I learned to pretend I didn't notice, because acknowledging it meant I had to do something about it, and I wasn't ready to face the ruins yet. Then came the night that burned everything into clarity. He was in his office, door half open, voice low, but familiar in its warmth. I heard him laugh, a sound that once belonged to me. "You calm me," he said softly. "You make me feel peaceful." That word hit me like a slap. Peaceful. It echoed in my chest, a cruel reminder that I was no longer his peace, just his convenience. I remember standing there, hand against the wall, feeling like the air had been knocked out of me. I didn't cry. I just stood in that doorway, realizing the man I once trusted had slowly become a stranger wearing my husband's face. From that day on, something in me shifted. The version of me that begged for love quietly packed her things and left. Even if my body stayed, I began to watch instead of weep. I listened instead of questioned. I collected details, moments, inconsistencies, like puzzle pieces I wasn't yet ready to assemble. One morning, as he adjusted his tie before another business dinner, I caught his reflection in the mirror. He smiled faintly and said, "You worry too much." I smiled back, my voice calm. "And you underestimate too easily." He didn't notice the warning in my tone. Men like him rarely do, until it's too late. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. My heart was quiet, but my mind was alive. The whispers had turned into truth, and the truth had turned into fuel. I knew now that my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy, because when a woman stops asking questions, it's not because she's given up. It's because she's finally learned where to aim. The invitation arrived wrapped in gold and deceit. His mother's handwriting was elegant as ever. "Family dinner to celebrate new beginnings." I remember staring at those words for a long time, feeling their weight settle deep in my stomach. New beginnings. For whom? Certainly not for me. Still, I went, because sometimes the only way to end a performance is to walk back onto the stage and take your final bow. That evening, I dressed with care, not for him, not for them, but for me. A black silk gown, simple yet commanding, with pearls around my neck that once belonged to my grandmother, a woman who had survived worse betrayals and still managed to stand tall. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I whispered, "Tonight, you don't beg, you don't break, you just watch." When I arrived, the house was lit like a cathedral, warm lights, soft music, too much perfume in the air. Everyone turned as I entered, offering polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. My husband kissed my cheek mechanically, his hand cold on my skin. I could feel the tension in every breath. Something was coming, and then she walked in. The room seemed to shift as she appeared in the doorway, young, radiant, and wearing my dress, the same gold gown I had worn years ago. On the night he told me he couldn't live without me, she even had her hair styled the same way, her lipstick the same shade of rose. The cruelty was deliberate. Their secret had become a spectacle, and I was meant to be the silent audience. He looked between us, a flicker of pride in his eyes, as if showing off a new trophy to replace an old one. The chatter dimmed, forks paused mid-air. Every eye in that room waited for my reaction. I lifted my glass slowly, the champagne trembling just slightly in my hand, and smiled. "Beautiful choice," I said evenly. "It looks better on women who've earned it." The silence that followed was absolute. Her smile faltered, his jaw tightened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something new in his eyes. Not dominance, not arrogance, but the faintest trace of fear. That night, I didn't lose my dignity. I reclaimed it, and though I left the dinner quietly, my footsteps felt like thunder, because from that moment on, I wasn't the wife holding on to a broken promise. I was the storm gathering in silence. After that dinner, I stopped playing the role they had written for me. Something inside me had awakened, a calm, deliberate kind of strength that doesn't shout or beg, it simply knows. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth to anyone, least of all to a man who traded loyalty for lust. Instead, I began to quietly rebuild the world they thought they had broken. Every morning, I carried on as if nothing had changed. I smiled when I needed to, nodded at all the right moments, and even kissed him goodbye before he left for meetings. But behind the calm eyes and measured voice, I was no longer his obedient wife. I had become his shadow, watching, recording, gathering. I reached out to people he'd forgotten mattered. The lawyer who drafted our marriage contracts, the accountant who handled his offshore accounts, the assistant who had once confided that she was tired of cleaning up his messes. One by one, I pieced together the puzzle he thought was too complicated for me to understand. It didn't take long to discover the truth. He had used my name to hide assets, bought property through joint trusts, and filed taxes that tied his empire to my signature. He had made the fatal mistake of thinking I wouldn't notice. And then there was her, the mistress, the woman who had walked into that dinner wearing my past. Through whispers from staff and mutual acquaintances, I learned she had already been promised a future, a seat at his company, a house to start their life, and a new car, all paid for, with money that legally still bore my initials. The irony made me laugh. Quietly, bitterly, beautifully, I began transferring control, piece by piece, shares, signatures, trusts. Every key that once opened his empire was now in my possession. I wasn't stealing, I was simply reclaiming what was already mine. And as I did, I started to see the cracks forming in his facade. Missed meetings, nervous phone calls, investors demanding answers. The man who had once stood so tall now looked smaller with every passing day. One afternoon he confronted me. His voice trembled beneath his anger. "What are you doing?" he asked. I looked up from my tea, calm as ever. "Learning the business," I said softly. "After all, you built it in my name. Seems only fair I understand what I own." His eyes narrowed, but I saw it. The flicker of uncertainty, the first hint that the game had changed. That evening, as he left for yet another late-night meeting, I stood by the window and whispered to myself, "Be careful who you teach silence to. Some of us learn to use it as a weapon." The next morning, I sent the first letter to the board. Quietly, respectfully, powerfully. By the time he realized what was happening, the balance had already shifted. The man who once thought he owned the world was now standing on ground that belonged to me, and I wasn't done yet. The day of the gala came like a storm disguised in silk. It was supposed to be his victory night, a celebration of his new business venture. a public display of power and prestige. The guest list sparkled with politicians, investors, and the same women who had once whispered about me. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I had learned that real revenge doesn't arrive with noise. It enters the room quietly and takes a seat at the head of the table. I arrived late on purpose. The moment I stepped through those glass doors, every head turned. The lights caught my silver gown, a color that reflected everything around it but revealed nothing of itself. I walked with calm certainty, not as his wife, but as a woman who finally knew her worth. My heels echoed like a countdown. Each step reminded me of every insult I had swallowed. Every night I had cried silently beside a man who believed my silence was submission. He stood on the stage, microphone in hand, looking confident but tired. His speech was all about growth, legacy, and vision. The audience clapped at every empty promise. I stood in the back, waiting. The air was heavy with champagne and arrogance. When he invited his partners to the stage, I walked forward, uninvited. His face froze the second he saw me. The crowd murmured, cameras flashed, and I smiled. The kind of smile that carries the weight of truth. "Good evening," I began softly. My voice didn't tremble. "I'd like to thank my husband for his dedication to my company." A ripple of confusion spread through the hall. "Yes," I continued, turning toward the cameras. "What many of you don't know is that the foundation of this empire stands on my name. Legally, financially, and ethically. And tonight, I'm here to make something clear. I'm not his shadow. I'm the architect." The room fell silent, except for the frantic clicking of cameras. I pulled out the documents, signed, sealed, and binding, that proved the transfer of shares, the financial mismanagement, and the misuse of my trust. Every secret he thought was hidden had been brought to light. His investors stared in disbelief. His mother's proud smile vanished, and the mistress, standing in the corner, turned pale, clutching her champagne flute, as if it could save her from drowning in shame. He tried to interrupt, his voice strained and desperate. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. I turned to him slowly and whispered, "That's what you always believed. But tonight, I'm simply reminding you who built the foundation you tried to bury me under." The applause didn't come immediately. It started small, hesitant, then grew louder until the hall roared. I stepped away from the microphone, my heart steady, my face calm. As I left the stage, I could feel his world collapsing behind me. For the first time in years, I didn't look back, because that night wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. The unmasking wasn't his, it was mine. And underneath every layer of betrayal, I found the woman I was always meant to be. In the days that followed, the empire he had built on lies began to crumble like glass underfoot. The news spread faster than even I expected. Headlines screaming about scandal, fraud, and betrayal. Billionaire loses control to estranged wife. The mistress vanishes as investors withdraw support. Everywhere I turned, the truth had finally found its voice. And for once, it wasn't me who had to defend myself. The facts spoke louder than any rumor ever could. He tried to call, of course, tried to reach me through friends, through lawyers, even through his mother. Each time I declined. I wasn't angry anymore, I was detached. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when the person who once controlled your world can no longer touch it. His apologies didn't interest me. His regret came too late, delivered by a man who had mistaken silence for stupidity. The mistress disappeared as quickly as she had entered. Her name faded from the gossip pages, and soon no one mentioned her at all. The people who once looked down on me at dinners now smiled too brightly when they saw me, their voices syrup-sweet with guilt. But I didn't need their validation. I had learned that respect earned through fear isn't respect, it's relief. At the company, I rebuilt everything he had destroyed. I hired women who had been overlooked, promoted those who had been silenced, and created a culture that valued integrity over intimidation. Each day, I walked into that office, not as someone's wife, but as a woman who had reclaimed her narrative. The staff looked at me differently now, not with pity, but with pride. One evening, as I stood by my office window, overlooking the city, I realized how quiet it had become. No whispers, no mockery, no weight pressing down on my chest, just the hum of a world that finally made space for me. And though I could have gloated, though I could have crushed him completely, I chose not to. Karma had already done what I never could. It humbled him. The man who once measured his worth in power now had nothing left but his reflection. That night, I finally allowed myself to breathe, not as a victim, not as a wife, but as a woman who had walked through fire and didn't just survive. She emerged glowing. It's strange how life looks different when the noise fades. There are no more cameras, no more headlines, no more pitying smiles, just peace, and the kind that doesn't need to be announced. I wake up in a smaller house now, but it's filled with laughter, with plants I actually keep alive, and with quiet that doesn't hurt anymore. I traded marble floors for wooden ones that creak when I walk, and every sound feels honest. Some mornings I still think about the woman I used to be, the one who smiled to hide bruises you couldn't see, the one who whispered her dreams so softly even she couldn't hear them. I wish I could hold her hand and tell her what I know now. That strength isn't born in battle. It's found in the moments you choose not to break. The world eventually moved on from the scandal. They always do. But my story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I didn't need to ruin him to rise. I just needed to remember who I was before he convinced me to shrink. That realization became my freedom. Last week, I was invited to another dinner. The same kind of glittering event that used to make me nervous. Only this time, I walked in as the guest of honor. The same photographers who once ignored me turned their lenses toward me, their flashes reflecting a new truth. I wore a deep red gown, not gold, not borrowed, but mine. Red for courage, red for rebirth, red for every woman who's been told to sit quietly while someone else writes her story. Before I left, I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror near the door. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. The woman standing tall, eyes steady, smile soft but certain. Then I realized I had finally met the version of myself I was always meant to become. As I stepped into the night, I whispered, "Power isn't what they give you, it's what you reclaim." And that's the message I want every woman to remember. You don't need revenge to win. You just need to stop waiting for permission to rise. Because when they wear your dress, your silence, or your pain, let them. The world will still see the difference between imitation and power. They humiliated me at my own anniversary party. My billionaire husband handed me divorce papers in front of 300 guests while security dragged me out like trash. Everyone laughed, everyone recorded, but they didn't know my father was parking his car outside, and he was about to burn their world down. Before we dive into this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you won't believe how this unfolds. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in this situation. Now, let me take you back to the worst and best night of my life. My name is Serena Wright, and 5 years ago, I thought I married the love of my life. Trevor Morrison was this brilliant tech mogul, 15 years older than me, charming, successful, and he swept me off my feet like something out of a movie. I was 32, working as an architect, designing buildings that I hoped would change skylines. He walked into my firm one day looking for someone to redesign his office headquarters, and 6 months later, he proposed on a beach in Santorini. Everyone said we were a power couple, a fairy tale. I was the girl from the South Side who made it. He was the billionaire who chose love over everything. But fairy tales don't exist, not really, and I learned that lesson in the most brutal way possible. Our 5-year anniversary was coming up, and Trevor insisted on throwing this massive party at our Beverly Hills mansion. I say our mansion, but honestly, I never felt like it was mine. It was too big, too cold, too perfect. 300 guests were invited, celebrities, politicians, tech executives, People whose names you'd recognize from magazine covers. Trevor planned everything himself, which surprised me because he usually let event planners handle things. He told me he wanted it to be special, that he wanted to show the world how much he loved me. I believed him. God, I was so stupid. The week leading up to the party, something felt off. Trevor was distant, cold even. He'd leave rooms when I entered. His phone was always face down. When I tried to talk to him, he'd brush me off with work stress excuses. My credit cards got declined at the salon that morning, and when I called the bank, they said the accounts were frozen pending review. I thought it was a mistake, some technical glitch. I didn't push it. I should have. His mother, Diane, flew in from New York 2 days before the party. That woman never liked me from day one. She wore white to our wedding. White, like she was competing with the bride. And at the anniversary party, she showed up in white again, this time with diamonds dripping from her neck like she was royalty. She looked at me the way you'd look at dirt on your shoe. Trevor's business partner, Kyle, was already there when I came downstairs that evening, drinking our expensive whiskey and smirking at me. He'd always made these comments, little racist jokes disguised as humor. Trevor never defended me. He'd just laugh awkwardly and change the subject. My father, Raymond Wright, called me that afternoon, saying he was running late. He owned a construction business across town and had gotten held up with a project delay. I told him to take his time, that the party wouldn't start without him. That was a lie, of course. The party started exactly at 7. And Trevor made sure of it. When I walked into that ballroom, wearing a custom gold gown, I felt beautiful. The room was decorated like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers, white roses everywhere, champagne towers, live orchestra. Guests were mingling, laughing, taking photos. I saw people I recognized from television, from Forbes magazines, from red carpets, and they were all there in my home, celebrating my marriage. At least, that's what I thought. Trevor's assistant, Brittany, kept hovering around him all night. She was his ex-girlfriend from college, and he'd hired her 2 years ago, despite my concerns. She wore a tight red dress that left nothing to the imagination, and every time I looked over, she was whispering something in his ear, and he'd nod. I felt my stomach turn, but I pushed the feeling down. Not tonight, not at our anniversary. Around 8:30, Trevor clinked his glass and asked for everyone's attention. The room went quiet. The orchestra stopped playing. Everyone turned to face us, standing on the elevated platform near the grand staircase. I smiled, expecting him to say something romantic, something about our journey together, about love conquering all. That's what husbands do at anniversary parties, right? Instead, he started talking about mistakes, about how sometimes in life, we make choices that seem right, but turn out to be wrong. My smile started to fade. People in the crowd looked confused. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Then he said it, the words that shattered everything. Sometimes you marry the wrong person. The room gasped. My heart stopped. I looked at him, searching his face for a punchline, for some indication that this was a joke, a cruel setup for a surprise. But his eyes were cold, empty. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Divorce papers. He held them up for everyone to see, and the gasps turned into shocked murmurs. Serena has been lying to me from the beginning, he announced, his voice echoing through that massive room. She married me for my money, violated our prenuptial agreement, and has been unfaithful. I couldn't breathe. None of that was true. We didn't even have a prenup. I refused to sign one because I loved him. And he said he trusted me. And unfaithful. I hadn't even looked at another man in 5 years. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my voice came out as a broken whisper. Trevor, what are you doing? That's when Brittany stepped forward with a tablet, showing printed photos, pictures of me with some man I'd never seen before. Clearly photoshopped, clearly fake. But the guests didn't know that. They saw what they wanted to see, a black woman who supposedly trapped a rich white man and got caught. Diane, his mother, stepped forward dramatically. I knew it, she shouted. I told you she was after your money, Trevor. I told you from the beginning." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some people actually started recording on their phones. Kyle started a slow clap, and a few others joined in, mocking me. My humiliation was their entertainment. I tried to speak louder, to explain, to tell them this was insane. But Trevor snapped his fingers, literally snapped his fingers like I was a dog. 4 security guards appeared from the sides of the room. Men I'd never seen before. They weren't our usual security. These were Trevor's people, brought in specifically for this moment. "Remove her," Trevor said simply. They grabbed me. I fought back, screaming, begging, asking why. My dress caught on something and tore. People were laughing now, not even hiding it. Cameras flashed, videos recorded. I heard someone say, "This is crazy." And someone else responded, "Get every second of this." They dragged me through that crowd like I was garbage, like I was nothing. I saw faces I recognized. People I'd hosted for dinners, people I'd donated to their charities, people I thought were friends. They all watched. Some looked away uncomfortably, but most just stared or recorded. The guards dragged me through the foyer, past the marble floors I'd picked out, past the art I'd selected, through the front doors, down the steps, and threw me onto the street outside the gates. My shoes broke. My dress was torn. My makeup ran down my face in black streaks. The gates closed with a heavy clang, and I heard the party music start again inside. They went back to celebrating. I sat there on the curb, alone, destroyed, with nothing. Cars drove past. A couple walking their dog crossed the street to avoid me. I tried to call my father, but my phone died. Of course it did. Everything Trevor gave me, the phone, the cards, the access, all cut off. I had nothing. No money, no way home, nowhere to go. I'd given up my apartment when we got married. I'd left my job to support his career, to be the perfect wife, to host his dinners and attend his events. I'd made myself completely dependent on him, and now I had nothing. A few party guests left early and walked past me to their cars in the distance. They looked at me, whispered to each other, and kept walking. One woman actually took a picture. I heard her say to her friend, "It's already going viral. Check Twitter." My humiliation wasn't just public, it was global. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time stopped meaning anything. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to understand where I went wrong, how I missed the signs, why I wasn't enough. My father's voice echoed in my memory from years ago. "Baby girl, make sure you always have something of your own. Don't ever make yourself powerless." I didn't listen. I thought love was enough. I was wrong. Then I saw headlights. A black Mercedes pulled up slowly and stopped right in front of me. The window rolled down, and there he was. My father, Raymond Wright, 65 years old, gray beard, tired eyes, wearing his work jacket because he came straight from the construction site. "Baby girl, you all right?" he said, then actually looked at me. His face changed. "What happened to you?" I couldn't even speak. I just broke down, sobbing so hard I couldn't catch my breath. He got out of the car, and despite being exhausted from a long day, he lifted me up and held me like I was 5 years old again. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "Right now." I told him every detail, the party, the accusations, the fake photos, the security guards, the humiliation. He listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter with every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, too quiet. Then he said something that confused me. "That mansion they're partying in right now." He walked to his car and opened his briefcase. He pulled out papers, official documents with seals and signatures. "I own it," he said simply. I didn't understand. He explained it calmly, like he was talking about the weather. 5 years ago, right before Trevor proposed to me, his company was failing. He was about to lose everything: the business, the reputation, the lifestyle. He was drowning in debt and couldn't get loans from any bank. My father, who'd built a quiet fortune through real estate investments over 30 years, had known Trevor's father before he died. Trevor came to him desperate, begging for help. My father gave him $50 million and the Beverly Hills mansion as collateral. The deal was simple. Trevor could live there, run his business, rebuild his empire, but Raymond Wright owned the property. The only condition was that Trevor had to treat me right. My father stayed quiet about it because I seemed happy, because I loved Trevor, because he didn't want to interfere. But he kept tabs. He always kept tabs. He pulled out more papers. I had him investigated last month, my father said. Something felt wrong, so I checked. Trevor's company was failing again, nearly bankrupt. He'd been moving money offshore, hiding assets, preparing for this divorce so he wouldn't have to split anything with me. Brittany wasn't just his assistant. They'd been having an affair for 2 years. His mother knew, Kyle knew, everyone knew except me. The party tonight wasn't just a divorce announcement. It was calculated. Humiliate me so publicly, so completely, that I'd disappear in shame and never fight for anything. He thought he could erase me. My father looked at me with fire in his eyes. You ready to go back in there? I was scared. Terrified, actually. But I nodded. He straightened his jacket, and I wiped my face. Hold your head up, baby girl, he said. You're a right. Act like it. We walked back to those gates. My father rang the bell. The security guard who threw me out 30 minutes ago opened it, recognized my father, and went pale. We walked through, up the driveway, through the front door. The party was still going strong. People were dancing, laughing, celebrating Trevor's freedom from the gold digger. Then someone saw us. Oh my God, she came back. The music scratched to a stop. People turned, started laughing again. Trevor spun around from talking to Brittany, and his face went white. Diane looked confused. Kyle froze with his drink halfway to his mouth. My father cleared his throat. The room went dead silent. Good evening, everyone, he said calmly. I'm Raymond Wright, and I own this house. He held up the deed. People gasped. Trevor stammered. What are you talking about? My father walked forward slowly, commanding the room like he owned it. Because he did. This mansion, the furniture, the art on the walls, all mine. Here's the deed. Here's the loan documents from 5 years ago. Here's your signature, Trevor. Diane shrieked. That's impossible. My father didn't even look at her. He pulled out more papers and started reading. Trevor's company was bankrupt. The billionaire was broke. Everything was leveraged, underwater, gone. Then he showed the evidence about the affair with Brittany, about the photoshopped pictures being fake, about the whole setup. Guests started recording again, but this time they were recording Trevor's downfall. The tables had turned. Social media was about to explode again, but not against me, against him. You have 24 hours to get out of my house, my father said. He'd already called his own security team, and they walked in on cue. Party's over, everyone out. People scrambled, whispering, posting, spreading the news in real time. Diane tried to argue, but my father shut her down with one look. Brittany tried to sneak out, and my father stopped her. Not so fast. You're named in the lawsuit too. Kyle practically ran. When everyone left, it was just us three. Trevor tried to apologize, tried to explain, tried to say it wasn't personal, just business. I stopped him. This was my moment. You tried to destroy me, I said, my voice steady now. You made me feel small, worthless. You threw me away like I was nothing. I stepped closer, but you forgot something important. I'm Raymond Wright's daughter. I didn't need your money. I never did. I wanted love. I wanted partnership. You couldn't even give me basic respect. I walked away with my father. Trevor collapsed into a chair, broken and exposed. We left him there in that big empty mansion that was never his. 6 months later, my life looks completely different. I reopened my architecture firm and landed 3 major projects within the first 2 months. One of my designs just won an award. Trevor's company went bankrupt, and he's being investigated for fraud. Diane won't return his calls. Brittany left him for someone richer. Kyle testified against him to save himself. I bought my own penthouse downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My father comes over for dinner every Sunday. Last week, I attended a gallery opening featuring my building designs. I wore gold again, but this time I chose it. I paid for it. I owned it. People ask me if I regret those 5 years. Honestly, number. I learned who I am. I learned my worth. I learned that you can survive anything when you remember where you come from. They thought they could break me. They forgot. I come from a king. And that's how my father saved me and destroyed the man who thought he could throw me away like trash. If this story taught you anything, let it be this. Never let anyone make you forget your worth. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated and came back stronger? Share your story in the comments. And if you loved this story, smash that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, you are never powerless when you know who you are. I'll see you in the next one.